I promised you I would share a little bit about this guy. His name is Shaun King. He tweeted yesterday that he wants all the white Jesus stuff taken down, and his European mother, by the way. Sadly, this guy's followed by over 1 million people on Twitter. How many of them are bots, I don't know. But he said the following. He says, yes, I think the statues of the white European they claim is Jesus should also come down. They are a form of white supremacy, always have been. In the Bible, when the family of Jesus wanted to hide and blend in, guess where they went? Egypt, not Denmark. Tear them down. Yes, all murals and stained glass windows of white Jesus and his European mother and their white friends should also come down. They are a gross form of white supremacy. Created as tools of oppression, racist propaganda, they should all come down. Okay, where do we begin with such dingbattery? This is dingbat nonsense for a few reasons. Number one, the way in which people artistically depict Jesus is something that different cultures have done. And if you go back and look at, for example, frescoes in the catacombs in Rome, and you look at as early as we can go back and find depictions of Jesus as the good shepherd holding a sheep on his shoulders, or as is in some other depiction of him, what you will find by and large is that he is lightly complected. And even in the Holy Land, when you go back to some of these ancient churches that are being uncovered, and you find frescoes, it is not at all uncommon to see Jesus depicted this way. So this is not something that, quote unquote, white supremacists have concocted as a way to oppress people of color, et cetera, et cetera. It's just simply not true. This is a fanciful notion that Shaun King is trying to use to whip people into a further frenzy. And for that matter, I can safely say I do believe that this is not going to be allowed to happen. I was having a conversation Sunday afternoon after Mass with a friend of mine, and he pointed out, he says, this tweet hadn't been made yet, so he wasn't referring to Shaun King. But, when the looters and demonstrators come to the parish and seek to tear down the statues or break into the church and deface it, he says, I expect that the Catholic men are going to rally to the cause and form a cordon, if necessary, physically with their bodies around the church to prevent the mob from getting in and destroying. And I'd like to think that my friend is right about that. I sure hope that if it gets to the point where the Shaun Kings of the world are leading the pitchfork and torch mob to the church to tear down the white Jesus, the white European Jesus, etc., because they just don't like it, I hope that there will be an effort on the part of men to defend against that nonsense. So a little bit of history there. You go back in time and you'll see many different depictions of Jesus, including within the first couple of centuries, when the memory of Jesus as a living person, walking the dusty hillsides of what is now Israel, was still fresh in their minds, and he was depicted as Caucasian. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is that various cultures around the world tend to depict Jesus in their own way. So you can look, for example, at Chinese Christians who depict Jesus and the Blessed Virgin Mary, with Asian characteristics. Nothing wrong with that. That's not racist, nor is it racist in African countries. And this is something that's widely seen for many years, and that is that Jesus will be portrayed as a black man. Black Jesus, and the Blessed Virgin Mary as black. There's nothing racist about that. So whether it's Asia or if it's Africa or in Native American cultures where Jesus is depicted, I've seen pictures like this painted by Native peoples, indigenous peoples, and they portray the Blessed Virgin Mary and or she and Jesus or just Jesus by himself with Native American features. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing racist about that. This is a cultural phenomenon where people want to see Jesus and they want to see Mary, and they have complete freedom in their artistic expression to portray him in a way that is familiar to them. There's nothing racist about it. Now, as for dingbattery, this is a great example of that. I think that Shaun King thinks that he got a gotcha moment there where he said, well, where did the Holy Family go? They went to Egypt. Yeah, so what if they had gone to Denmark? What if instead of to Egypt, what if they had gone across the water to Greece, where people are Caucasian? It's not that much further. What if they had wound up in Italy for a time? You see? And the notion here that's kind of built into this nonsense is this notion that there were no Caucasian people in the land of Israel at the time of Jesus. So if you've done a bit of sociology and even just cultural anthropology, you know that the different groups of people in terms of racial and ethnic characteristics can be divided into various groups. So you have Caucasian, there's Negroid, there's Mongoloid, and there's subgroups and things. And the main thing is that certain groups of people tend to have certain kind of characteristics, although not all of them do. So at the time of Jesus, in the time and place where he lived, the skin of the person that you would likely have been able to see, which would be, for the Jews anyway, would be their face and their hands and their feet to some extent. Most of the rest of them was covered up, both men and women. They tended to wear in those days very heavy and voluminous clothing. But the skin that you would have seen would have been very dark in the case of Caucasian people because they were exposed to so much sunlight, and to the extent that people were Arabs or they came from an area where they were not in the Caucasoid, Caucasian racial group, their skin would have been dark too. Much of it had to do with because they were out in the sun. But it's just simply incorrect to assert that that nobody at the time of Jesus in Palestine, in what is modern day Israel, were Caucasians. There were plenty of Caucasians that lived in that area at that time. And so it is simply false to assert with certitude that Jesus could not have looked that way. He could have looked that way. I'm thinking, for example, about in Africa, there are albino Africans who, by and large, sadly, are ostracized by many people. And look this up on the YouTubes, and you'll see this. Or look it up on Google, and just type in albino African, and you'll see these are black African people who, because of a quirk in the pigment of their skin, they are entirely white, and in some cases even have blonde hair. So they are African, but they are white skin-wise. Now, that's an anomaly. But the point to remember here is that he wants to incite further racism in the name of trying to fight racism by saying that the image of Jesus with white skin is racist propaganda or a tool of oppression or it's a gross form of white supremacy. None of these things are true. Now, I do believe that he is intent upon doing what he says that should be done, which would be namely the tearing down of these things. Look what they're doing with the other statues. Now, this just happens to be religion, which is different from the political and social issues behind the statues of George Washington and Theodore Roosevelt and the others. This is a religious issue. And nobody has a right to say, you can't portray Jesus in this way if you want to. So I want to bring this to your attention because people are buzzing about it right now. And I must say, I always smile. I smile because, especially Team Taco members on Twitter, they start peppering me with tweets. Hey, did you see this? Look at this. Look at this. And just FYI, guys, I'm always going a mile a minute on these things. And you'll be happy to know that was already at the top of my list of things to talk about yesterday. Although I do appreciate the people who are sending me things. Now, there's another little detail here that I don't know if it's escaped your notice or not. Shaun King himself has some controversy, and you can look him up and take a look at him. He sort of has a sort of affected, stylized facial hair and haircut and such. But there is some controversy over whether he himself is actually black. And there are, for example, it was brought up, and this was brought up by Breitbart, among others, that his birth certificate shows that his father, in fact, was white. His biological father was, in fact, white. Now, this is reported in places like the Daily Beast, which is not a right-wing organization. It's not a right-wing publication. The Daily Kos, definitely not right-wing, picked up on this story. Now, he says, this is a quote, "I've been told for most of my life that the white man on my birth certificate is not my biological father, and that my actual biological father is a light-skinned black man. My mother and I have discussed her affair. Kentucky public records reviewed by the Daily Beast show the father listed on his birth certificate is white. His name is Jeffrey Wayne King. He is listed as Shaun King's father on the birth certificate. Criminal records identify Jeffrey King's ethnicity as white. And then there's some links to the different articles that get into this question of whether or not Shaun King is actually white. And, I'll leave that to the experts to decide. It's not any of my business anyway, except for the fact that he brought this up, whiteness being a kind of tool to exploit people of color. Now, if you're interested, there's another person who kind of ran into the same situation. You may remember her name is Rachel Dolezal. And she was in the news quite a bit until the last several years when she sort of disappeared from view. She was the president of the NAACP chapter in Spokane, Washington, until 2015 when she had to resign because it turned out that she wasn't black. So she would wear makeup and do her hair in a way that seemed to suggest that she was black. She's entirely white. Her parents are both white. Her grandparents on both sides are white. She's white. Pictures of her came out in grammar school. She's a white girl. Nothing wrong with that, but she sort of, talk about cultural appropriation. She, you might say, masqueraded as being black. Look at Jimmy Kimmel. He's in big trouble right now. He had to take time off from his television program because videos surfaced from him years ago in which he was doing skits in blackface. And there are other things too. I mean, some of which I probably won't even mention on the air. But people are digging back through his past and saying, wait a minute, you're a white guy and you're even just for comedy, you're pretending to be black by being in blackface. Well, she wasn't doing comedy. She was purporting that she actually was black when she never really was. So there's a whole lot to that story there. But I offer you that by way of consideration because those little details, the Rachel Dolezals of the world, and to whatever extent this question about Shaun King's ethnicity, whether he is in fact white or not white, I'll leave that to the experts to decide. But the fact is that those things play into this. They're background issues, but they play into it because you have to ask yourself, what is the motivation for somebody like a Shaun King, who really, I think, just wants to stay relevant. He just wants to stay in the public eye. He just wants to keep his street credibility up there. So by making an inflammatory statement like he did on Twitter yesterday, saying, yep, all those European Jesus, they got to come down. And all those European mother of Jesus, Mary, that's all got to come down. Stained glass windows, got to come down. Now, I think he probably floated this like a trial balloon to see what would happen. And chances are, I'm assuming that some of the desired effect has actually happened. Look at me. I'm talking about it right now. But everyone's buzzing about it. But I really do believe that those kinds of statements are not merely whimsical. They actually are representative of the actual goals that many people have. So back to my friend, talking with him out in front of the parish church on Sunday. Put a mark on the wall. And when these things start to happen, remember that I said this to you. There may come a time when the dingbats unite in force and they try to go into your church and tear down the statue of Jesus, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, or the statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Don't let that happen. I'm not advocating violence. I'm a nonviolent guy. Absolutely. But there comes a time when you have to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to allow this. Now, what form that may take, I don't know. And I certainly hope it never comes to the point where there's conflict like that. But take a look also, and I mentioned this yesterday, I'll leave it at this, I've got to take a break. I'm going to see if I can find a couple of these videos and post them for you. But they're easy to locate on YouTube. Just look up the feminist demonstrations against the Catholic Church in Argentina, and you'll see some horrendous video of a church in Argentina. This happened in more than one church, in which you've got this raging, gibbering mob that are cursing and swearing and punching and kicking and doing everything they can. I'm talking about thousands of people trying to get into this Catholic Church to desecrate it. And what is stopping them? There's a cordon, there's a ring, a human shield of men, most of them young men, who are standing arm in arm. They're standing shoulder to shoulder, forming a human barrier to prevent this raging mob from getting into this church and desecrating the Holy Eucharist and the statues and things like that. And they're being abused, they're being cursed at, they're having things thrown at them, punched, kicked, you name it. They're not doing anything violent in response. They're just standing there taking it. And they won because the mob did not get into the church and desecrate it. So let us hope and pray that that kind of situation never comes to this area. But be aware, these kinds of things do happen in other places.
For more of The Patrick Madrid Show, visit relevantradio.com/Patrick.